Hey everyone, it's Miss Joyce. Today we'll be learning about numerical expressions. Let's first talk about the order of operations. This is the order that we'll solve problems in. We can use gems to help us know which part of the problem to solve first. So first let's talk about the G in gems. The G stands for grouping symbols. This might be parentheses or brackets. So if we see grouping symbols in our problem, we know to solve whatever is inside of the parentheses or brackets first. Then we move on to the E, which stands for exponents. An example of an exponent might be 10 to the power of 2. So after we finish solving anything that's inside the grouping symbols, we'll solve anything involving exponents. After, we'll move on to the M, which stands for multiplication and division. So that means that if the multiplication division is not inside of the parentheses or brackets, we'll solve it after we've solved anything inside the grouping symbols and any exponents. If there's both multiplication and division in the problem, we'll solve it going from left to right, just like if we were reading a sentence. Finally, the S stands for subtraction and addition. So if the subtraction and addition is not inside of the grouping symbols, we're going to wait to solve that portion of the problem last. If there's both subtraction and addition in the problem, we'll solve it going from left to right, just like if we were reading a sentence. So let's talk about which operation we would solve first in each of these problems. Starting with A, what we're going to do is look to see if there's any grouping symbols. We can see in problem A, there are parentheses. So we're going to solve what is inside of the parentheses first, which would be 2 plus 3. In problem B, we can go ahead and see if there's any grouping symbols since G comes first. And we can see there is no grouping symbols. So let's move on to the E for exponents. So we're looking to see in problem B if there are any exponents, and we can see there's no exponents. Let's move on to the M, which stands for multiplication and division. In problem B, we can see there is no multiplication or division. So now we can move on to the S, which stands for subtraction and addition. In problem B, we can see there is both addition and subtraction. Since there's both of these operations in problem B, we're going to solve it going from left to right. So since 8 plus 4 is listed first, we're going to solve 8 plus 4 first. Now let's move on to problem C. We go back to the start and see if there's any grouping symbols in problem C. We can see there are two sets of parentheses, 6 plus 2 and 5 minus 3. So since there's two sets, we're going to solve whatever comes first. 6 plus 2 is what we would solve first. Then we would solve 5 minus 3, and finally divide our answers from both of these parts of the problem. Now let's go to D. First, we're going to see if there's any grouping symbols. We can see there are no grouping symbols. So we move on to the E, which stands for the exponents, and we're going to see if there's any exponents. We can see there is exponents here, 10 to the power of 2. So that's what we would solve next. Remember, 10 to the power of 2 is the same as 10 times 10, or 100. Let's move on to problem E. First, we're going to see if there are any grouping symbols. In problem E, we can see there are no grouping symbols. So let's move on to E, which stands for exponents. We can see there are no exponents in problem E. So we can now move on to M, which stands for multiplication and division. So we're going to look at problem E to see if there's any multiplication or division, and we can see there is multiplication here, 4 times 3. So that's the part of the problem that we would solve first. Now let's move on to numerical expressions. Here we have 5 times the sum of 18 and 2. We're going to rewrite this as a numerical expression, which means we're using numbers and operations. First we have 5 times. Well, we know times is multiplication, so we're going to do 5 and the multiplication sign. The sum means the answer to an addition problem. So we're going to add, here we can see we're adding 18 and 2. So that's where we got 18 and 2 from. But remember, sum is the answer to an addition problem. So we need to be multiplying 5 times the answer to 18 plus 2. In order to get the answer to 18 plus 2 before we multiply, we need to put 18 plus 2 in parentheses. This allows us to solve what is inside the parentheses first and then multiply our answer times 5. So let's do that. 18 plus 2 is 20, and now we can multiply 20 times 5 to get 100. So the value is 100. The value is our answer when we solve the problem. Let's try number 2. The difference between 10 threes and 5 fours. Well, the difference is the answer to a subtraction problem. So we know we're going to be subtracting. Now let's figure out what we are subtracting. We're going to be subtracting 10 threes, which is the same as having 10 groups of 3, or 10 times 3. We are subtracting that and 5 fours, which is the same as 5 groups of 4, or 5 times 4. So now we can go ahead and solve this. Remembering gems, we can see that there's no grouping symbols, there's no exponents, so we need to multiply first. Notice there are 2 groups of multiplication symbols here, so we're going to solve from left to right. 10 times 3 is 30, and 5 times 4 is 20. So we can now subtract 30 minus 20, which is 10. So the value or answer is 10. Now let's try number 3. The sum of 6 and 4 tripled. So the sum, like we said before, is the answer to an addition problem. So we know we're going to be adding 6 and 4. We're going to be tripling that answer. So to make sure that we're going to triple the answer to 6 plus 4, we need to put 6 plus 4 in parentheses. We're going to be tripling it, which means multiplying by 3. Now let's go ahead and solve. Let's solve what's inside the grouping symbols first. 6 plus 4 is 10, and now we can multiply that answer times 3. So 10 times 3 is 30. The value or answer is 30. Finally, let's rewrite a few of these numerical expressions in words. Here we can see 14 plus 6 times 5. 14 plus 6 is in parentheses, so we know we need to solve that first. So we're going to be finding the answer to this addition part first. Since we're finding the answer to the addition portion, we're going to be finding the sum of 14 and 6 first. This will allow us to get our answer to the addition part and then multiply by 5. Another way to say multiplying by 5 is times 5. Let's go ahead and solve this. We're going to do what's inside the grouping symbols first. 14 plus 6 is 20, and now we can multiply that answer times 5. 20 times 5 is 100, so the value or answer is 100. Now let's try number 2. Here we're multiplying 4 times the answer to 32 minus 12. So let's start here. We're going to be multiplying 4 by the answer, so we can write 4 times. Now the answer to 32 minus 12 would be the difference, because the difference means we're finding that answer to a subtraction problem. The difference between, and then we put the 2 numbers that we're subtracting, 32 and 12. Let's go ahead and solve this. Since we do have grouping symbols here, we're going to solve what's inside of them first. 32 minus 12 is 20, and now we can multiply our answer 20 times 4, which is 80. So the value or answer is 80. Let's try one more problem. Number 3, we are going to be multiplying 10 and 3, and we're going to be adding that answer to 5 and 2. So let's go ahead and rewrite this in words. We have 10 times 3, or 10 threes. We're going to be adding this, so we can use the word plus. And now we're going to be adding this to 5 times 2, which is the same as 5 twos. Here, we're going to go ahead and solve what's inside the parentheses first. 10 times 3, which is 30. And we're going to be adding that to the answer that's inside the parentheses here. 5 times 2 is 10. So we'll be adding 30 plus 10, which is 40. So the value of this expression, or the answer, is 40.